to Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Weldin. Today's story is called Chatter the Squirrel, an adaptation of the Adventurers of Chatterer the Red Squirrel books by Thornton Wilder, written for you by Daniel Hinds and performed for you by Kelsie Lee. Thanks! Enjoy the episode!
Chatter the Squirrel. Once upon a time, in a cozy old neighborhood, there lived a rascally little squirrel named Chatter. He was a red squirrel, which meant he was small and fast, with tall ears all covered in fuzz. Now, Chatter made his home in a sprawling oak tree between a tall playground and a short brick house. Lots of other squirrels lived there too, and they spent their days chasing acorns and seeds, and even the occasional juicy berry. Chatter wasn't much like them, though. He was lazier than most, and didn't care to run around gathering and searching and storing. Instead, he would sneak about and steal food from the other animals. He was naturally quite sneaky and sly, and all in all, he was an excellent thief. The squirrel's favorite target was an old, heavy-bellied raccoon named Rocky. Chatter would wait until Rocky had gathered a big pile of delicious snacks, gathered from the ground or pulled from the trash of the playground next door. Once the pile was big enough, Chatter would drop a pebble on the raccoon's head from way up in the tree. "Hey, what was that?" Rocky would say, looking up all confused. "Is it raining rocks?" He would stand up on his back paws and look all around, snout twitching, and while he was distracted, Chatter would dart in and steal an especially delicious morsel. "Hey, you thieving little twit!" Rocky would bellow. "Get back here!" Chatter would laugh and take off running. Rocky was bigger and stronger and surprisingly fast, but the squirrel used his small size to his advantage. He would run for a short stone wall with a mossy little hole in the base. He would shoot into the hole, and the chubby raccoon would smush into the wall, unable to fit. "Oof, you fuzzy little robber!" "Too slow, big boy!" Chatter would shout back, laughing and enjoying his free meal. He ran this same trick on other raccoons and badgers, and even the little kids at the playground, stealing their candy and then shooting into the wall. The only one he was afraid of was Redtail. She was a fierce old hawk, beautifully feathered with razor-sharp features. She was always hungry and would gladly scoop a squirrel as a snack if one happened to be in the open for too long. Thankfully, she was usually looking for bigger meals, so Chatter was safe as long as he didn't antagonize her. Antagonizing meant bothering someone until they got mad, which Chatter was very good at. But he managed to restrain himself when it came to the deadly hawk. He kept clear of Redtail and went about his thieving ways with the others, singing to himself and enjoying the easy life. Sitting in a tree, taking it easy, living worry-free, life is all breezy, acorns aplenty, but baby, I wanna be a squirrel living free, a squirrel living free, a squirrel living free, a squirrel living free. Stealing from raccoons all slow and tubby, stealing from kids all sticky and grubby. You call me nuts, but baby, I wanna be a squirrel living free, a squirrel living free, a squirrel living free, a squirrel living free. The little squirrel thought he had it all figured out, but then Shadow the weasel moved into the neighborhood. Shadow was big and slinky, with soft rounded ears and long, wiry whiskers. He looked a little like a squirrel himself, but sterner and stouter, with sharply pointed teeth and a long, swaying tail like a cat's. "Oh, a new target," Chatter chittered to himself when he saw the new neighbor. The weasel had found a huge, ripe strawberry and carried it back to a cozy place among the roots of Chatter's tree. The berry was round and red and sweet, and the squirrel could smell it even from a dozen feet away. "He calls himself Shadow," the squirrel whispered, sneaking closer, "but I'm the real sneaky one." Chatter crept closer and closer. The weasel looked nearly as thick as a cat, but the little red squirrel was sure he could pull off the heist. Shadow might be fast, but like the raccoons, he was too big to fit in the stone wall. And now, to steal the berry. Chatter snuck silently down the tree toward Shadow the weasel. He figured that since the weasel sorta looked like a squirrel, he'd probably be afraid of the same stuff. Luckily, Chatter had heard old Redtail the hawk yell plenty of times, and he figured he could do a pretty good impression. On silent little paws, he snuck up right behind Shadow and then... Ah! Shadow screamed, and he spun around looking for the hawk with wide and wild eyes. Chatter took the opportunity to dart by and snatch the strawberry. "Thanks for the snack, sucker," he said. "Nah," growled the weasel. "You lousy little thief." "I've heard it before," laughed Chatter. "See you later." Shadow took off after him, just as fast and nipping at his heels. Chatter was worried for a moment, but then he saw the stone wall ahead. The mossy little hole meant safety, and it was calling him home. "Gimme back my lunch," the weasel snarled. "How about instead you eat my dust?" Chatter said back. He sprinted even faster and then dove into the hole in the wall. He plunged into the safety of the rocky little hole, and the weasel pulled up short. "Ha!" he said. "Safe now." "Oh, are you?" asked Shadow. Then Chatter watched with horror as the weasel stretched out like a slinky and walked right into his hiding place. "Uh-oh," said Chatter, backing up to the stony wall. "Didn't know weasels could do that, huh?" Shadow asked, advancing on the little thief. "I bet you also didn't know that we eat squirrels, and since you stole my lunch, I'm hungry." Chatter spit out the strawberry with a little squeak. "Oh, look at that! There's your lunch," he said. "I'm so sorry, sir. It'll never happen again." "You're right. It will never happen again," said the weasel, "because your thieving days are done. You've stolen your last meal, and now you're on the menu." Shadow lunged forward, and Chatter dodged up and over his head. The weasel crashed into the rocky wall with a roar, and the squirrel shot out of the hole, back into the grass. "Get back here, you bushy burglar!" Chatter took off running, panting to himself and looking all around. "Where do I go? Where do I go?" He dodged and rolled to one side as Shadow nearly bit his tail. "Can't hide! Can't run forever! Come on!" The squirrel came to a thick tree and scrambled up the bark, hoping the weasel couldn't climb. Unfortunately, Shadow climbed just as fast and kept right on his tail. "Oh, come on! If I get out of this, I'll never steal again!" he swore to himself, and then ran down a long branch. It got thinner and thinner the farther out he went, and soon it was bending under his weight. The weasel ran out after him, and Chatter realized he was cornered. "Nowhere else to run!" Shadow shouted, his little fangs bared. The squirrel looked out and saw another tree. It was across the street, but the branches had grown out towards the middle. It would be a long jump, but it was his only chance. "Here goes nothing," he said, and then he gave a mighty leap. With his paws outstretched, he soared across the gap between the trees. The wind ruffled his fur and blew back his ears, and the other branch was closer. He hit it and scrabbled with his paws. It drooped under his weight and then sprang back up like a bow, ripping free of Chatter's paws. "No!" the squirrel cried, plummeting towards the ground. He managed to twist himself around and spread out, but he still hit the pavement hard enough to knock the wind out of his body in a little whoosh. High above, he heard Shadow the weasel laughing and then scurrying back down the tree. "I never should have stolen. I should never have stolen," Chatter said to himself weakly, too stunned to stand. "I should have gathered acorns and worked like the rest of the squirrels. I should have." He gasped for breath and rolled onto his back, looking up at the trees dancing above him. They were beautiful, leaves green and bobbing in the breeze. His eyes were a little blurry still, but he spotted something else, too. There, nestled into a crook among the branches, was that Was that a nest? A dark figure loomed over him. "Nice try, little thief," said the weasel, licking his lips. "Any last words?" Chatter looked up again, past Shadow. It was a nest, a big nest. Mind racing, he got a wild, desperate idea. "Last words," he said. "I have a few." "Make 'em quick," said Shadow. "I'm hungry."
Sitting in the dirt, feeling all queasy. Got a lot of worry, nothing is breezy. Trouble aplenty, but baby, I wanna be a squirrel living free. A squirrel living free. A squirrel living free. A squirrel living free. Stealing from raccoons and I'm feeling bad. Stealing from kids, leaving me sad. I won't do it again, 'cause baby, I wanna be a squirrel living free. A squirrel living free. A squirrel living free. I wanna be a squirrel living free.
Chatter sang his song as loud as he could. Shadow looked annoyed, but let him finish, rolling his eyes. "Real cute," the weasel said. "I bet you're sorry, but it's too late for that. It's time for lunch." From above, there was a rustle of feathers. Shadow didn't seem to notice. "Actually, Shadow, I think it's time to run." "Run? From a puny little squirrel?" From behind the weasel, there came a shrieking, "Caw!" "Nice try," said Shadow. "You think I'm gonna fall for that trick again?" "Caw! Caw!" A giant, winged shadow fell over the weasel. He turned to see Redtail standing behind him. It was her nest that Chatter had seen, and his loud singing had gotten her attention. "Caw!" The hawk shrieked again, and Shadow screamed too, and then took off running. Redtail launched back into the sky after him with another piercing cry. Chatter took the opportunity to run to his hiding spot in the wall. He threw himself into the mossy hole and then peeked out. He saw Shadow dodging back and forth as Redtail dove after him again and again. It was clearly only a matter of time until the hawk made him a meal. For a moment, Chatter considered letting her take the weasel, but he couldn't. He still felt bad for stealing, and he figured he owed Shadow a save. "Hey, weasel!" he shouted. "Quick, duck in here!" Shadow turned and barreled towards the stone wall, the hawk on his heels. Chatter made room, and the weasel dove in just in time. Redtail's claws slashed at the stone behind him for a moment, scraping at the stone, but she finally gave up and flapped away. Shadow looked at Chatter and heaved a sigh of relief. "Thanks for the save. Sorry I tried to eat you." "Sorry I stole your lunch," Chatter said, and then they both looked at the strawberry they had left forgotten in the mossy hole. Maybe you don't eat me, and we can share instead." Shadow smiled. "Sure, but no more stealing, okay?" "Definitely not. Just maybe from Rocky the raccoon." Shadow glared at him. "No stealing at all. That's a deal." They shared a laugh, shared the strawberry, and from that day on, they were fast friends. The end.
Thanks for listening.